Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Legacies. A great season finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, we're literally picking up after, in the aftermath of last episode. Well, in certain regards, because I think, first and foremost, we started with Landon and Cleo breaking into a museum because, they're trying to find this piece that she believes will lead. We ultimately find out that she was trying to retrieve a piece of Malivore she had crafted. It's like, right, she says, like, it's kind of just like clay. Like, Malivore goo is very malleable like clay, so it's kind of actually really good for artistry and stuff, so. But basically, it's something that she made. It is interesting, though, like a reminder of, like, right, you knew Leonardo da Vinci. I literally was about to say DiCaprio. Jesus. Leonardo da Vinci. And, like, you kind of inspired. You not just knew him, you knew him biblically. And it's like, isn't it kind of messed up? Like, he got all the, praise and everything, but you played your part in it. And Cleo's like, that's just part of history that some people just don't get the credit they deserve. But what's interesting is, like, Cleo put one guard to sleep, and then Landon went over and, like, bam, bam, bam. I was like, oh, wow. I was like, oh, because, like, the moment it slowed down and he slid, I was like, all right, Landon did, like, get stuck in hell dimension and kind of trained himself how to survive. So I was like, I guess that kind of makes sense. So that was interesting. I was like, all right. But then, like, he gets super aggro, and Cleo's like, such violence isn't necessary, which Landon's like, really? Hypocrisy much? All the violence you did just to get what you wanted? So this interesting partnership. We're getting peeks into it over the course of the episode, but then we cut back to Josie, Lizzie, and Hope, talking with Clark, and it's just like, hey, I'm back. And it's like, last thing I remember was getting my head sliced off. I mean, I guess the world works out in a mysterious way because the person who did that was a necromancer, and he's gone now, so I guess it's like, maybe you can make some argument. He kind of got his in the end to a certain extent. I mean, he did become human and became Ted again and was kind of a good dude, to a certain extent. So it's like, which maybe that is supposed to be a little, now Clark has kind of had a change of heart, potentially. But it's like, right. It's like, but I came back and it turns out you still haven't dealt with Malivore, even in all this time that I've been going. It's like, well, we're working on it. It's like, is he still sending out monsters? Some. So for him, it's like, right, I've got a plan that can deal with him. And then it's like Lizzie and Josie aren't listening. Well, Lizzie in particular is like, nope. He made my sister go full dark side, try to take control of your body. Hope, like, are you forgetting what he did? No, let's not trust him. But at the end of the day, Hope still, it's still that, like, weird thing inside of Hope where, like, she can't, like, she feels like she has to do everything on her own because of her destiny as a tribrid. Because I guess it's also, like, it stems from the fact is that life has kind of taken everyone away from you, so you always have this deep, like, it's a very psychological thing in her where it's like she pushes people away because pushing them away and keeping them away is a lot easier than dealing with the fact is of, like, having them in her life and having them taken away, whether it be her mom or dad or uncle or whether it be Landon. Like, she's just lost a lot that it's just like, I'd rather, like, she just thinks she can't break that, like, complex inside of herself of, like, right, I have to do everything alone. I have to shoulder everything alone. But obviously she ends up running off with Clark because he says he's got his idea because it's like, right, we have to find the Malivore pit and we can close it. I am his son after all, so that could lead you to him. But I love the whole thing of, like, right, why are we, here somewhere secluded? She's like, oh, so there'll be no witnesses. And Clark's like, wait, what? And she's like, I'm only, like, halfway joking. It's like, no, I just don't want to do magic and, any eyewitnesses, so. But I love that she also puts the mimicry spell on him again, and he's just like, why is it every time it's like, not this again? And it's like, it's become a part of their pattern. It's just like, anytime it comes to you, she, like, uses that mimicry spell on you, and it's just like, but it turns out Clark isn't a Mudman anymore. He's actually human now, so I guess it was just I wonder, was it, I was about to say, was it on accident? But it's like, no, he purposely did that because now that he's no longer Mud, now that he's human, he's no longer being controlled by Malivore anymore. Now it's like, oh, I'm my own person. So, he escaped his father's grasp. But it still is a thing of, like, right, you lied to me. But for him, it's like, no, I can still lead us to Mud because regardless of me being human, it's still in my, being Malivore's son, it's still in my DNA, And obviously he's asking about, Landon and everything, and it's like, finds out, like, oh, my brother's no longer a Phoenix, nor is he with you anymore. But the fact is, Clark was like, oh no, I'm sure your kids will make it. Like, the fact is, he had that type of mentality. Episode was kind of weird, but I guess it's like, no, you kids are too cute together. Like, come on, the fact is that he's the one, like, because like Hope and kind of giving up on Hope about the whole thing. It's interesting that Clark out of anybody was the most hopeful about it, because at the same time you have Lizzie and Josie. It's like, at the end of the day, it's like, right, she ran off with another Malivore son, and it's like, right, she's still dealing with, like, in Lizzie's mind, it's like, oh, she's still gonna go above and beyond for the other Malivore son. And Josie's like, right, like, the breakup, we didn't really account for, like, right, like, it's still like a fresh enough wound that, like, she hasn't recovered mentally for it. So Lizzie's idea is saying, like, as her two best friends in the world, which I was like, that's super adorable. Once again, I cannot stress it enough, when you think about where Lizzie started at the beginning of the series, like how she felt about Hope, hearing that come from her is crazy. Like, the fact is, like, Josie, it would be no surprise, but Lizzie Saltzman being like, oh, we're Hope's best friends, you would have never, you would just not think that Lizzie, of anyone, that would come from her. And I just actually think that's actually super adorable, because, and it's true, because, like, their relationship has been complicated, but they've known each other, like, they've known Hope the longest, too, so it's just actually really sweet, especially after they're, like, come to terms, like, with each other last episode. A lot of stuff they kind of kept buried kind of finally came to the surface and everything, so it's like, they are, like, true besties now, so I'm like, that's really good. I think that's really sweet. But Lizzie's mind is like, right, we've got to, like, basically get Hope a rebound. And it's like, you joke me, like, what, some perfect bachelor's just going to fall from the sky. And lo and behold, who shows up is Ethan. I immediately was like, that's interesting, too, because of your adventures from far, far away, last episode. And the way they were kind of setting up, I was like, I would have expected, like, but it's like, nah, it's all about getting Ethan and Hope together, even to the point Lizzie spends the entire episode trying to, like, hey, Ethan, like, oh my God, Hope is so amazing, she's this, she's that, and it's like, wow, you're going above and beyond, but you can tell, like, even just like Ethan's behavior, just the way he's talking with her, it's like, oh, he's starting to dig her, which is interesting, because it's like, right, because I think it's so fascinating. Maybe on some subconscious level, Lizzie didn't really think about it, because it's like, right, and that, like, maybe that's why, because Hope and Josie pointed out last episode, like, why does he look exactly like, why does that Han Solo-esque character look a lot like Ethan? And it's like, on some subconscious level, like, maybe she never really gave it too much thought on the forefront, but maybe on some subconscious level, like, the character she described, maybe she thought, like, in her, like, personal life, like, Ethan kind of fit that. Because it's interesting, because immediately my brain was like, now in retrospect, I was like, I'm surprised that character did end up being MG, considering, like, the whole thing. And that becomes a conversation, too, because for her, it's like, well, everything with her and Sebastian was complicated. Then there's the will they, won't they relationship she has with MG, but that doesn't work out. So for her, like, her love life is something she'd rather not focus on. Because even Ethan's like, oh, have you ever put this much, have you always, like, cared more about other people's love life than your own? And she's like, no, that's definitely a more recent development, But at the end of the day, it's like, it's like, right, I don't want to go on a date with Hope. I actually like someone else. And she's like, oh, really? Like, who is it? Like, tell me who it is, because whoever she is, she doesn't hold a candle to Hope. And because Ethan's like, right, like, the reason why I didn't say anything before, because he's like, I didn't realize I was into someone else until just now. That's going to be interesting, especially because where Josie and Finch are this episode, kind of, because Josie's avoiding Ethan because everything that went down, and Finch is ultimately like, right, like, I was never told that I was a werewolf, so, like, no more, like, keeping secrets between us. And so she opens up about the fact it's like, right, I used black magic and ended up ruining Ethan's career, football career. So she already feels bad enough about that. Plus, MG had to compel him to forget all about the supernatural world, and because of that, MG lost a really good friend. And it's like, that's the sad thing about, like, humans being a part of this supernatural world. It will destroy them. And like, for Josie, it's like, the supernatural world has taken enough from him, more than he could even realize. I mean, supernatural world is kind of why his mom and sister left, so he's kind of left behind a little bit on some extent. So like, it's played a major role. I mean, it's the sad fact of like growing up in Mystic Falls. Like, it's just you can't help but stumble across. You can't go any direction without stumbling on the supernatural. It's just so ingrained in that town's history. Obviously, going way, way, way back in the day. So like, there's no escaping that, you know. But Josie doesn't want to add more to that. Sadly, well, interestingly enough, Ethan asked Lizzie out, and Lizzie said yes. And you can see like Josie's like, damn, because it's like, I want him nowhere near the supernatural world, but life. And this whole episode's about fate and destiny, and it's like, oh, like he just no matter how much we push him away from the supernatural world, it finds its way to creep back into his life. To be fair, it might be good for Lizzie in the long run. I don't know, but I mean, their dad has managed. I mean, that's come with its complications, but he's kind of managed his way through the supernatural world as well. Weighed his way through it, you know. Once again, not 100% successfully all the time, but he's still standing. But you know, he's kind of a rare case. We've seen how that story has not worked out well for other people, because for every Alaric there is like a Matt who just kind of is like super more so anti-vampire, but he's just not the biggest fan of the supernatural world, at least mainly in that regard, but still. And also, like, Ethan isn't the only one we've come to know over the course of this series that's suffered because of the supernatural world. There's been plenty victims of that across all three shows. So, I also love the fact is that we have, on one side of things, like, the whole superhero squatting up between MG and Caleb, because it's like, right, we need to go find Cleo, and we'd rather, you know, you help us find Cleo, Dr. Saltzman, rather than us getting a witch to kind of go behind your back to find her. He's like, well, I appreciate you guys coming to me first to kind of like help. It's like, all right, you know, obviously they're meant to cover Cleo and Landon's tracks, because obviously like a guard had seen them and their faces out there about being the criminals they are. So it's like, right, they gotta, like, you know, it's like, oh, you know, are you ready, my old chum? And I was like, all right, let's go to the Batmobile. I'm like, dude. And I love they're like trying to suggest all these different names and stuff like that, which MG's like, I'm not about any of those names, which I love them. It's like, what, Tooth and Nail, Hustle and Flow, and Kayla's like, I'm Flow. But it's like, MG's like, I do not like any of those names. I love them kind of pretending to be cops. It's like, aren't you guys fairly up? Just, this is our first case. But it's also like, what are you going to say to Cleo? And ultimately, like, in the car, I love that, you know, he opens up about it. It's like, he kind of regrets not, like, he's never been the biggest in, like, really being real about his feelings, and he kind of regrets never telling her how he feels. But it's like, right, but she inspires me to, like, want to open up. She inspires me to be a better person. And MG's kind of looking like, oh, because, like, you would never expect Caleb out of anyone to say something like that. But, I mean, to be fair, Caleb he doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve as much as MG does, but you can definitely see, like, oh, he's kind of a sentimental person at heart. Like, even though he won't always show it, but, like, his actions constantly show, like, his true nature of, like, how good-hearted he is and how much of a loving person he can be. Like, whether it be, like, how he feels about Cleo or his relationship with MG, you know? And even them, like, on their way, it's like, right, there was an accident. It's like, well, we gotta lock and load and, you know, gotta do our superhero thing. Even at one point, it's like, okay, like, Alark being like, I don't understand. Which one of you sound and which one of you is Fury? And it's like, it's still a work in progress. So I thought that was dope. Another avenue with the episode is Cleo and Landon's partnership. It's like, right, we've got to trust each other. So no matter what kind of ends up happening, we're in this together, this mission to stop Malivore. And so Cleo uses the mud, but it doesn't go anywhere. Now, in retrospect, it makes sense why it didn't lead them to a portal or anything. Because I guess the reason for that is that technically the portal wasn't... Maybe because technically the portal is gone now that Malivore's kind of out and about. We'll get to that soon enough. But maybe that's why that didn't work. Or maybe it's supposed to be like, right, it doesn't work because he's kind of he's in front of you, so you don't, like, maybe that's another reason why. because I kept wondering why Landon kept looking. I was like, Landon's acting real. I mean, he's been acting really off lately, but he was actually kind of there for Cleo because Cleo kind of felt like she had failed. But Landon understands kind of it's like, right, I had to fight and struggle in that prison world. So he's like, I never thought I'd get out. Which Cleo's like, because he was saying like, I'm worried that Malivore could have just popped up and devoured me at any point in time. And Cleo's like, yeah, like the moment I escaped him and ran to Italy and found love, I felt the same thing. So, but her plan is to basically inspire Landon to potentially find a way to defeat Malivore, which she does inspire him, and he's like, I know what I got to do. We don't know what it is initially, but I have some ideas, but we'll get to that later. There's even a car ride with between Clark and Hope, where, like I said, Hope has kind of accepted her destiny, and that's a conversation of just like accepting fate, that there's no escaping it. For her, it's like, there's no me and Landon. Like, he was made to be Malivore's vessel. I was made to destroy him. So it's like, it's like the only more incompatible thing would be dating someone with cats, but even like I said, Clark being like, you guys give up too easily. Like, the fact is, you can kind of fight your fate. He technically did. It's like, oh, now I'm no longer controlled by my father. I'm like human. Like, I'm here as an example of like, right, things aren't 100% set in stone. But obviously, they end up running into Cleo and Landon. But the whole holding hands thing is like, oh, that could be misconstrued a certain way. But it's like, no, I was just trying to inspire him with an idea that like help us. It's like, we're partners in this. There's not more to that. But even Clark noticing, it's like, yeah, Landon, you have changed. And Landon, I know, would never leave Hope alone. He was like, right, I've just accepted my fate that like we cannot be together. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. But he's like, shouldn't I know we hate each other, but shouldn't we, don't we hate our father more? It's like, with him gone, we can finally be what we were always meant to be, brothers, And, at first, and I love that too, because the entire time you're like, Clark's got to be planning something. He's always been the slime ball. We've seen that there's some version of him that can be good, that he isn't 100% evil. Kind of very much like I brought up earlier, like a little bit kind of similar to the Necromancer in that regard. But the moment, like, he was like, yeah, it must have been hard kind of being, like, kept in that darkness. And I love in that moment, Clark's like, the only person I ever told about the darkness was Hope, and he took the knife. Because I thought he was going to try and kill Landon, because like, oh, you're not you're not a phoenix anymore, so you'll stay dead this time. Like, I thought there was something there, like why he was holding the knife. But in that moment, the moment Landon said that, I was like, that's not Landon, that's Malivore. And I was wondering, like, when Cleo left him alone with that mud, could it have done something? Could it have been at that time he got infected? But we find out that's not the case. He's been Malivore the entire time since he came back. At some point in time, it makes me wonder, did Landon actually fight and survive inside of Malivore for like, so some of that, like the equipment and stuff like that he got, was that actually Malivore? Was that after Malivore had gotten him before? Because I'm thinking it might have been before. Well, it could. I was thinking that, but maybe it could be after. Because it could be Malivore's like, yeah, but sadly, this isn't the body of a phoenix, so I need to train it up. So maybe he was hunting all these monsters, boosting himself up, getting used to the body, and then left the prison world behind. Or could it be that Landon was doing all that, and just at some point in time things went wrong and Malivore finally got him? Because now, like, a lot of the stuff he said about, right, being trained in that prison world, with the exception of, like, oh, being worried about being hunted by Malivore, it's like, no, like, it makes you wonder, like, fighting all those monsters, was that his way of, like, training, like Malivore inside Landon? Who knows when he got him? Was it immediately after Landon left that note in the prison world, or was it, like, sometime afterwards? I'm sure later on we'll get context for that, but sadly he ends up devouring Cleo. I think mainly because he needed Cleo out of the way, because it's like, right, you inspired me, but I don't want to take the chance that you might inspire someone else. And so Hope finds Clark bleeding, and obviously Hope wants to give him her blood to heal, but it's like, no. If there's a chance that blood's going to send me back to the prison world, back to Malivore, even to that darkness, even if I'm human now. We already know what kind of effect it had on Landon and everything, no longer being a phoenix and everything. So it So she ended up having to use fire to cauterize the wound. Alaric showed up in time and tranked Landon slash Malivore. I even love that he's like, my God, he's like, close enough. And it's like, oh. Which also is interesting to know that, like, obviously Malivore's got that God complex, thinking of himself as something of a god. But now it's like, right, this has been Malivore the entire time. And Hope is beating herself up the most because she's like, because of how she feels about Landon and everything, like how different he was, she was so willing to accept, right, he would, because of him being in the prison world for however long time passed, that's why he changed. So, like, she kind of played into Malivore's hand. The point was to kind of break her heart so that she won't see him for who he really is. Like, once again, it's kind of one of, I mean, she kind of had blinders on when it came to the Golem pretending to be, the Golem of Landon being the perfect version of him, and now the same thing in this regard too, you know? So it's sad, you know, but obviously for Hope, it's still that thing of, right, like, you ended up having to face your death. Like, you managed to crawl out of Malivore, but you had to do it by yourself. And she's like, it just makes me sure, like, everyone else around me is trying to tell me I don't have to face this alone, but at the end of the day, I am going to have to. But the fact is that he was like, but I didn't do it alone. Granted, he did set things in motion, so it took another party to help him, and that being Andy. But it's like, no, like, I didn't do it alone, and you are different from me in the regard that you aren't alone. Like, you have friends, you have family who are in your corner. So this tribrid destiny, you don't have to shoulder it alone. Like, you had to remind him, like, remind her that, like, you're not in this alone. Let the people around you help you, like, you know? And even Lizzie and Josie were like, you know, Lizzie's like, after our adventures last episode, like, why did you, like, run off on your own? And she's like, right, I had to be reminded by even someone like Clark that, right, I'm not in this alone. Because, like I said, it's so ingrained in her now from a psychological point that she can't break that habit. Like I said, it's a complex. To think, like, you're doing people a favor by not, like, getting too close to them while kind of keeping them at a distance, because if they're around you, you're afraid that they'll get hurt, but also you think you kind of have to handle everything your own because of destiny and everything. But it's like, no, the destiny isn't just yours to carry, you know? So now that that's kind of been set up, there's also, like, you know, Alaric's like, right, I had to be reminded about Cleo. This was someone that was very important to you, Caleb. So you have to decide, do you want the memories back? Because if you do, it is going to be painful. But for him, it's like, regardless of it, if it was someone important, I need to know. So Hope does the spell to remind everyone of Cleo, and it's like a very handy spell to kind of counteract the Malivore thing. At the same time, we find Cleo in the darkness, and she sees some light. I was almost halfway, like, when we get that scene at the very end where it's Landon inside of a jail cell chained down, I thought that was supposed to be inside of Malivore, that Cleo, like, comes across him locked up, kind of like how Lucifer's locked up in his cage in Supernatural. Like, I thought it was going to be something like that, but it's like, no, that's back in the real world where they have him locked down. I love the whole superhero squad standing in front of him, and it's like, give our friends back. And he's like, right, if you want that, you're going to have to give me something I want. Fate's a bitch, ain't it? You know? Which immediately my thought about that is, I think what he's planning, what he got inspired by from Cleo, and, like, it dealt with a lot of, like, him looking back on a lot of stuff. It's like him making Clark, Landon and Hope's relationship. I think what he got inspired by is a new host. Landon's still at risk of being hurt by Hope. Granted, Malivore's kind of like, you won't do it. You'd never do it because this is Landon's body and you care too much about him. So he has that benefit, but there's always, like, right, you will always be poison to me. You will always be danger. So I think he's going to do what he did with Landon, but instead of going for a phoenix, he's going for a tribrid. I think he wants to make his new host body that of a tribrid, because that way even Hope won't be able to stop him anymore. Like, it's like, right, we're the same, and, like, this body makes me impervious. Like, I don't know whether it's going to be a thing of, like, he's going to try and take over Hope's body. Like, right, going to make her more of a malleable, like, host instead of, like, it's like, right, I made a mistake with no child born from me could ever be, in defense of like the tribrid blood. You know, it will always hurt me on some level, even if Hope isn't a full-blown tribrid. Because that's what I thought was interesting too, when like Cleo was like, oh yeah, we're going to take this blood that we have of Hope's and like close the portal. I was like, but that's not going to do anything. It was like, but it was meant to be long enough for them to come up with a more permanent solution to defeating Malivore. At least stop the monsters and stop his like advancement till now. But it's like, no, he's already out and about, has been for a while. So, like I said, I think that's where we're going though. Like that, I mean, last time we saw Cleo did have that blood on her, so I'm wondering did he still have that or not. But I think that's the plan. Make a tribrid like Landon, like whether it's possessing Hope or not, I don't think it. I think it is just making a straight up tribrid version of Landon. No Phoenix, just straight up tribrid, and that way he'll be immune and he'll never have to. I mean, because it would also make you one of the most powerful like supernatural beings. Like that trifecta makes you pretty dangerous. So I could definitely see that be kind of like quote unquote like the ultimate power to a certain extent. The thing that gave birth to you that can be your destruction can ultimately be your ultimate asset and ally, your salvation to a certain extent, you know? So I think that's potentially what they're setting up. We'll ultimately have to wait and see if that's the direction this ends up going. Legacies is coming back for a 4th season. I'm so curious to see how this is all going to play out, because especially a thing you have to consider too is Hope's need to always save Landon. It's always had its ups and downs. And so the question then is going to become, you know, that's actually going to be complicated too, because it's like, right, not only were you fooled once by a golem of Landon, that this is Malivore pretending to be Landon the entire time as well. So that potentially could be some issues in the future. You know, I don't know. That could definitely be a complicated conversation, I think. But her, like, we've seen time and time again how much that's been an issue of like, right, I've been trying to save Landon over and over again, and whether it's going to turn into that conversation of, you know, you're going to, I mean, because if they try and kill Malivore as he is, like Cleo being trapped inside will die as well, I assume. So it's like, we got to save Landon, we got to save Cleo, but that need to save might put both Caleb and Hope kind of a little bit against the rest of the group. But to be fair, it's the thing of we're not in this alone. Superhero squad's here to save the day. We're in this together, and I think that's going to be the biggest difference. But I think that's still going to be kind of some points of contention going forward. We'll see. Also, the whole thing with Ethan and Lizzie, like what that turns into. Especially like what that might mean with the whole MG thing, because that's going to be complicated. It's like, right, his essentially became best bud. It's like, oh, but you don't remember that. I remember all of our friendship things, but you don't. And you're also dating the girl I've had the biggest crush on forever. I kind of moved on, but now I kind of, you know, I'm sure that's going to be a complicated thing because MG knows how Lizzie feels now too. So that's just going to be all kinds of complicated. You know, what consequences will there be for Ethan, like, being this close to the supernatural world again? Like, we'll ultimately have to wait and see kind of how that all shakes out as well. Obviously, the continuation of Josie and Finch, like, you know, what's next for their story, well, next season. What other monsters will come across? You'd assume none since Malivore's there, but he probably could. We don't know. Because I thought, like, now that he's in Landon's body, there probably is technically no portal. He's just been off on his own, dumping out monsters. But it could be he laid the foundation of, like, no, here's a portal from inside of myself, and I won't tell you where it's actually located. Like I said, I still think that's why. I still think that's him being out and about is why they couldn't find an actual portal, because there technically isn't one. He is the portal, so that's why I'm like, so there shouldn't be any monsters running around. Like I said, not unless he did plant the seed of like a portal somewhere else and won't tell them the location, so monsters will be frequently popping out of it. But I think it's just he's the walking portal. Like, I think that's the case. But we'll have to wait to see next season for clarity on that. We do have Clark out and about now, so that's definitely going to be interesting. Like, right, what he's going to be able to do to help save his brother / kill their father. I mean, that might be a point of contention too. Like, right, he probably is like, my dad's out and about, so I probably prefer him to be dead, because I'd rather not let him live long enough to like accomplish whatever it is. Because even he was saying like, yeah, not my dad. Like, told you, my dad had big plans, because he's going through such great lengths now, and also being around Cleo inspiring him again. So, like I said, whether my thought about what his plan is, what he got from Cleo, we'll have to also wait for next season to see. But I'm really excited to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into season 4. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.